we go. It's recording. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Have attention, please. All quiet, please. Thank you. Go ahead and have your notes out. We're going to continue on with looking at Latin America and the situation of Europeans and Africans and so forth moving to Latin America. But first, I'm going to come around and collect from you your piece of paper that indicates, oh, and don't forget to write down on there, if you haven't already, whether R-rated movies are okay or not okay, just in case. Let's see. Okay. I'll just put that on here. I got a couple that were turned in a little bit early. Got that on there? And yes, okay, got that? Okay. There we go. Not that it necessarily makes much difference because a lot of folks, you gave me yours already. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much. Awesome. Got Charles. And, oh yeah, I like those. So far, I don't see any dupes. We'll see tomorrow. Okay. Yeah, write your name. Give me some guidance there. Do you like, what kinds of movies? Like action, war movies, comedy, horror. Okay, oh, there we're going. All right, good. Good. Okay, all right, yes, we can do that. All right, ooh, on the envelope, please. Okay, all right, good. Yes, nice. Nice, yes. Good, it helps. I've seen a lot. Oh, I see a dupe. But it's okay, actually. On this particular dupe, there's multiples. There actually is. There's multiples of it. Yeah, there's like 2 different versions, which helps. Yeah, I was wondering if that was going to happen. Okay. Here we go. A little bit more specificity. Action. Okay, yeah, actually. We could probably come up with something. Yeah, and again, with these, I'll probably be able to, when you guys come in on Tuesday, next week, right? I'll be able to give you your selection. And what you'll want to do is dive right into, is this movie available? Watch it. Do I like this movie? Especially if it's, because I've got a couple of you guys who are not asking for specific movies and so forth, which is cool. So watch it right away, see if you like it. And then the other one that's really, really important is, can you find the research on it? Because if you can, and you're able to write a paper long enough to meet the criteria, great. If not, come see me right away, and we'll get it changed. It's no worries to change up a movie and so forth. Okay? All right. Questions or anything about the assignments? Okay, good. Is in here, maybe by even next week, I'm going to have us watch a movie in here because I like watching the movie Amazing Grace with students because I stop it at different points and go through not only what was different about the film versus what my research showed up, but give you some examples and some practice in why do you suppose the filmmaker changed it up a little bit. Okay? All done?
Yep.
Okay, I'll take both. Grazie. You can take that and just shove all that in here. Very good. And good. We'll just make it disappear. All right, very good. Thank you. What's that? Do you want to write a tardy slip and I'll sign it? Just write, say, going to class, put the date and time on it, and I will sign that for you. Okay? In fact, I'll even sign it before you write it down. So don't write something like, you owe me $1 million, because I'll deny that that's my signature. Okay? That's great, 1,000. Okay, so that'll be good. All right, so where are we left off? You got your thing in front of you? Yes? This is interesting. Social hierarchy. Hierarchy meaning who is at the top of the heap in the Americas. It's going to be kind of obvious that the people at the top of the heap are going to be Europeans. At the bottom of the heap are going to be Native Americans, who might be at the very, very bottom of the heap. African slaves that are brought over. I mean, because they're not even from that continent, and they're brought over forcibly and put into work in a place that they've never been ever in their life before. But I want to back it up just a little bit here, because it's kind of interesting how this social hierarchy develops. Color matters, and let me see, do we have a word for that when color matters and some people are considered better than others and yada, 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 based on stuff that's not really even, connected to their intelligence or their abilities or anything? What would that word be? Thank you very much. Racism. We're going to talk about racism? Yeah, we're going to talk about racism. The curious thing about this is the original people, write this down, the original people who came over into these Spanish colonies and Portuguese colony in the Americas were predominantly what gender? What gender? What gender do you suppose, Blake? Really? Why? What were these men doing? Yeah, they were trying to get land. They were like the conquistadors and so forth. Right? When we were seeing displays and so forth of people coming over, the women didn't have as many opportunities. I mean, there may have been some women that wanted to go over and so forth, but mostly the early arrivals are the men. So write this down. Some of the early arrivals of Europeans, and in this case we're talking about Spanish and then also Portuguese and so forth, are men coming over. And then men conquer this and the men conquer that, and then some of the men are like, you know what, I want to have some land, and I want to grow crops on the land, and I want to make a lot of money. And then they might think, I want to have a family. Now that's a little bit more complicated, isn't it? Can you just snap a family all by yourself? Is that how it works? No. You guys will learn about that. Was it this year or next year? You learn about that in health. Next year? Okay. In the meantime, you can find out. But you need a man and a woman. And here's the thing. Write this down. In the early exploration, the early settlement by Europeans in the Americas, you don't have European women very much. So in some of those early European families that are established in the Americas, who's the mama? Who's the wife? Yeah. Hello? Natives. You guys are like, I don't see any problem with that. I wish everybody in the world throughout entire history would just not give a rip about where you're from or whatever. And a lot of the men are like, well, I want to have a family, and there's native women here and so forth. And among those would be predominantly consensual, right? Those are marriages, families, kids, next generation, next generation, next generation. Got that? It started to change a bit as those colonies became more settled and established, and they grew. And then you had, like, in the movie The Mission, that city, Asuncion, I mean, it was a city. I mean, there were houses and all kinds of things like that. It was pretty well established. It had been there, I think by the time you get to that movie, probably about almost 200 years. As you start getting things established with, like, civilization, then, write this down, more women would come over from Spain to a Spanish colony, from Portugal to, Brazil and so forth. And then the women are coming over and they're marrying, the men who are there and so forth. You got that? Now it's like kind of like, okay, so now we're getting Spanish women marrying Spanish men coming over, or I don't know, what is it if you have people, what do you call? You're going to learn a new word here. What do you call somebody who is partly European, Spanish, and then native? Let's go ahead and look at the hierarchy here. There's a word, you need to know this. It's called mestizo. Okay? Mestizo is a mixture of European, Spanish, Portuguese, and native. Okay? And in the early years of these colonies, a lot of those families were like of, mixture. But as time went on, and European women were coming over and so forth, which of those cultures and bloodlines seem to be preferred? The European. Because that's the ones who were in charge. So, for example, if you had, let's say, you're one of the original Spanish settlers in the New World, and you've taken upon yourself a native bride, and now you have children. Are those children Spanish, native, or mestizo? Now, a lot of these things are arranged and so forth, marriages and so forth. What do you want for your children? To marry a native, a mestizo, or a Spaniard? You're modern, you're like, I don't care, whoever they love. But as you go forward on this, there's going to be more and more insistence, make sure you write this down, that Europeans, people who have European heritage, right, stick to their group. Okay? They stick to their group. And so your original family your kids might be 50-50, but their kids and their kids and their kids, if they marry newly arrived Spanish men or Spanish women, then your family is going to be more European. Do you understand that? Okay? So who cares about this? Over time, particularly as you get these more settled things, over time you get these preferences for European bloodlines. And it's going to get really complicated, and I'm going to tell you about some serious tension going on here. The first two groups, Peninsulares and Creoles, those are going to be the most powerful and important groups within the American colonies. One of them is 100% European. You see it right there. Peninsulares. You can write that down. They're the top of the heap. They are born in Europe. They aren't born in Spain. They speak Spanish the Spanish way. They have the latest Spanish customs. They may be working for the royal government, coming over to administer things over in the Spanish colonies. Okay? Creoles, make sure you write this down. The Creoles, they're put below the Peninsulares, but I tell you what, these Creole families have been in the Americas longer. They're second, third, fourth, fifth generation Americans, but they have a lot of European heritage. Do they have 100% European heritage? If you were to go to like a plantation, a hacienda, and it's been in the family for 5 generations, and it was established by a Spanish settler who came over on a boat and established that, and now they've got a big house and it's been there for a long time. Is it 100% Spanish? What do you think about that original mama-papa thing? Where was mama from? She probably was native. You guys are like, well, who cares? Give me a break. They cared. And who particularly would point out in those Creole families that they've got some native blood in their family? And the Peninsulares. They would come over and they would look and they go, oh, they're all feeling good because they speak Spanish the right way. They've got the latest fashion, right? They're going to be like, oh, this is a nice colony and so forth, but maybe I'll just go back to Spain someday. It's better. Whereas the Creoles, make sure you put this on about the Creoles. The Creoles generally have a fair amount of wealth. They've got the land. They've got the plantation. They have established themselves. But you know what they also have? They probably also have some native heritage in their family bloodline. And you can never get rid of it. You just sort of hide it a little bit. You don't want to get into a conversation with a Peninsular because the Peninsular will be like, well, why don't you tell us about your great-great-great-great-grandma? Actually, I'm curious, you guys, anybody you know if you have any native heritage in your family? There you go. It's like, no big deal. Yeah. And if you don't know, you could actually use some blood tests and things and stuff like that would pop up. The Creoles, just mark this down because later on there's going to be some tension. And eventually there's going to be so much tension, you know what those colonists are going to do? They're going to declare independence. against the mother country. They're going to declare independence against Spain. They're going to fight against Spain so that they can be an independent country. Guess which group of people are going to be the independence leaders? The Creoles. And actually, to use an analogy, we're talking about Spanish ones there, but in the English-speaking colonies, guess who are going to be the leaders of the American independence movement? Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, people like that who are second, third, fourth, fifth generational English descendants who don't like the snotty attitude coming at them from the British, telling them all what to do. Does that make sense? So you see that. There's going to be some tension between the top groups, Peninsulare and Creole. But one thing you notice about both of them is they're either all European or pretty much mostly European. Well, who's the next one down? They're looked upon as not quite as good. There's the Mestizo. Okay? And basically it's kind of like, 50-50. What is more socially acceptable than somebody who is 50% European and 50% native? What about it, Keith? What is more socially acceptable than somebody who is 50-50 European and native? Exactly, that's it. Yeah. And how do you do that? How do you do that? Could you spend your way to a position so that you could appear more European? Can you do that? What would you have to do to appear more European? Could you do it with your clothing style? Yes, you've got money, you can do it in your clothing style. Your hairstyle? What about your facial features? Can you hide your native features? Maybe, I suppose, with various different makeup and sort of things like that. Yeah, that's going to be part of what's going on there, because it's oh my gosh, it's just steeped in racism. There's this sense that if you're European, you're superior. And the folks that are 100% native population, they're considered below the Mestizos. Do you got that? Did you figure that one out? They're considered below the Mestizos. It's really interesting because if you go to a country like Mexico today, who lives in Mexico? Mexicans. Are Mexicans all of the 100% well, what is 100% Mexican? If you actually go there, you'll see, even still today, there's a bit of a social hierarchy. Guess who's in the best position in Mexico as far as probably in the best economic position, cultural position, and so forth? People who have a little bit more European heritage. Some of the poorest areas in Mexico are areas that have high percentage of native, almost 100% native blood. Okay? And a lot of them don't speak Spanish as their first language. They're speaking their native language as their first language. Well, we haven't even got to the bottom. Enslaved people, right? Enslaved people. And this isn't a complete chart because I'm going to introduce another one in there. You can see it in the bullet point. Enslaved people are at the very bottom. African slaves are at the very, very bottom. Sucks to be an African slave. Of course, among African slaves, who is in the worst position? Put in your notes, they're called the saltwater slaves. These are going to be slaves that have just arrived from Africa in the boat. They survived the precarious journey. There they are in the New World, working really, really hard and just bewildered. They haven't picked up Spanish or Portuguese or, in other places, ultimately English. They're still speaking their African languages. And socially, they would be below African slaves who had managed to survive a year or two or three. Now, there's another group that we haven't talked about yet, and you want to put them in here as well. Just as you have mestizos, mixtures of European and Spanish, or native and European blood, you also have mixtures of African and European. Can anyone tell me what that is? If you look at the handout, you can see. Some of you guys got it in front of you. Do you see what that is? It also starts with an M. You have to be careful to use this word because if you just throw it around flippantly and go, oh, you must be a You know how to pronounce that? Mulatto is how that's pronounced. Mulatto. Sounds like something you'd order at Starbucks. It's not. Okay? Mulatto. If you go up and go, oh, you must be mulatto. You've got African heritage and European heritage. That's what mulatto is. Right? So, how do mulattoes come into existence? If mestizos oftentimes come into existence from a marriage of a European and a native, how do most of the mulattoes come into existence in this situation? Anybody have any ideas? Marriages of Africans and Europeans? You're shaking your head, you don't think so? How? An accident! An accident. We didn't mean for this child to have been conceived in this particular situation. I suppose maybe in one sense it was an accident. All right? I suppose you could write this down. It's got 4 letters, starts with R, rhymes with ape. Although, if that was actually, before I was a teacher and so forth, I was a prosecutor. And if somebody's charged with rape, that is non-consensual. Okay? You have a right to say no. And if that person doesn't follow through with the no, then they are violating the state law. Go ahead and write this down. If a man, European, owned African slaves, including men and women, and the master, European, wanted to have relations with his female slaves, they were not in a position to say no. Okay, so you got that? So African slaves oftentimes were giving birth to children. And the heritage was her heritage plus his European heritage. And you can see what's going to happen over a period of time. When you get many, many generations of a slave system in a particular colony, what's going to happen? Think of it this way. If you got a very dark-skinned African slave, female, light-skinned European master, what's the kid going to probably be? As far as like a color or a hue? Somewhere in between? Yeah. And then, of course, take a guess. What's the status of the child? They're a slave. They're born a slave. If you're born to a slave, you're a slave. And then let's just say, imagine this, okay? Because you're going to be like, oh my gosh, this is just not much fun, but wow, history. So let's say the master, has a son with his wife, so that's like 100% or so European. And then the son then inherits all the slaves, including, I guess, somebody who would be maybe his half-sister or something like that. And then if he has relations with this mulatto half-sister and so forth, and she becomes pregnant, she gives birth to a child who is what percentage European? Have you figured out the math? 75%, yeah. And that child would have even lighter skin. And if you go through multiple generations of this, at some point you may have people with African heritage but not as much. You could have very light-skinned mulattoes. Could they pass as a white person in society? Would they want to pass as a white person in society? Heck yeah. Because if you can pass as somebody up here, you would do that. Do your hair in a certain way, do other kinds of things, your clothes and so forth, because you're trying to hide your African heritage because that's lower socially in this racist hierarchy. You got it? Okay. Do you like it? You're like, no. But that's the way things were going in the Americas. And by the way, that's where things were going in the United States of America too, before we became a country and even after for quite some time. Okay? Surprise, surprise, surprise. When we get to the American Revolution and so forth, we'll be talking about Thomas Jefferson. He's a very interesting guy. He was a slave owner in Virginia. His wife, they had a child. His wife's father was a slave owner And when Thomas Jefferson married his wife, Martha, as part of the wedding gift, Martha Jefferson was given, and Thomas Jefferson was given, a slave from the household. In all likelihood, that slave was Martha Jefferson's half-sister, probably fathered by Martha Jefferson's father. And when Martha Jefferson died, that gift, that half-sister, that slave, Sally Hemings, belonged then to Thomas Jefferson. And they had kids. But they didn't get married. In fact, Thomas Jefferson never remarried. But he had kids with a female who, in probability, was his wife's half-sister. You got that? Yeah. Okay. This is actually a painting. They called it the casta system. You see that in there? The whole thing is referred to as the casta system. And so they literally would have, so that everyone could see quite clearly, the whole pecking order of where people fit in the scheme of things. Okay? European is the most predominant. Native would be okay. African heritage, not so good at all, in the way they set things up in the colonies. Okay? In fact, if you get to modern times, they actually called that mixing of European and native, or mixing of European and African, they called it, they would actually have, later, they would make laws, because there was a lot of pressure saying, you may not have a marriage. I mean, the original guys that showed up, you know, the character that Vinny played, the original, he's like, I want to have a family. I don't see any women from Spain. I'm going to go ahead and have a family get married to a native. But eventually, write this down, miscegenation laws, you can write this down. Miscegenation laws basically said, you cannot have this mixing. And so, even in my lifetime, they had a law in Virginia that said that blacks and whites could not get married, and they could not have intimate relations. They certainly couldn't get married. And it was like the basis of a law that was challenged, I want to say like 1970. They made a movie about it called Loving, which is actually his last name. He grew up in Virginia, and he fell in love with a woman who was African American. Although if you look and you're like, African American, probably lighter skin, probably she had some European heritage. Most people who have African American heritage, long-standing in this country, have got European heritage in there. They wanted to get married. They did get married in Virginia, and they were arrested. And they challenged that law, saying, that's just wrong. That's like unconstitutional. That's a deprivation of our right to get married to who we want to. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said they can be married. So they got rid of miscegenation laws. Miscegenation was basically saying we didn't want the mixing of the two quote-unquote races. Hello, they're all part of the same human race, but whatever. Yeah, here's one for you. President Obama, darker skin color or lighter skin color than his father? Anybody know? Anybody know? You know who his father was? His father's last name was from Obama. Guess where his father was from? Kenya. 100% African, right? Barack Obama's father met Barack Obama's mother, who had, I want to say, not probably far off from this, 100% European heritage. She was from Kansas. And they met, fell in love, had a kid. What is Barack Obama as far as percentage of African? About 50%, yeah, I would think. Okay? His father, 100%. His mother, probably 100% African. His mother, probably 100% European. What about Barack Obama's kids? Would they have more African heritage than him or less? More, yeah, because his wife has her heritage from America, African American America. So, yeah, each of his kids, I think, is more than 50%. I would probably peg it somewhere around 60, 70, 80% or something like that. There you go. It's America. How many of you guys are like, I don't care? It's like, hello, I don't care. But it mattered back. And even in modern times, it mattered. I'm here to speak to you. You'll learn more about this next year in government class. But I'm here to speak to you to tell you that when I was in first grade, they integrated my school. They brought kids from one part of the community who were African American, and they bused them to my school and mixed it all together. And if somebody was like considering have you ever seen, Remember the Titans, the film? Right? That was set during the time when I was in the first grade. And that was the high school integration where blacks and whites would finally be in Virginia in the same high school and playing football on the same team. They had some bumps to get over, but they ultimately had a rockin' football team. They got over it. I mean, like, hello. So some of this stuff was like a long time ago. It's surprising that some of it's actually still fairly close. But it's a good thing we've sorted out all of the racial issues in our country, right? Or are we still working on those? Raise your hand if you'd say, I think we're still working on some of those as far as, yeah. How many guys would say, nope, it's all good. It's all good, right? I would say, for your age compared to where I was when I was your age, it's better. And I would say it's much better than then, and it's much better than back then. Much better. Okay, got that? Miscegenation. All right, now let's have some fun. 18th century weakening of Spain and Portugal. Write this down. In the 18th century, the 1700s, right, after Spain and Portugal had established these big colonies and stuff, they actually start weakening. They're actually going to start getting beat up a bit by other European powers like the British and the French and the Dutch. And you're like, well, why is that? Why is it so that literally by the time we get to the 1800s, Spain is going to lose pretty much all of their colonies. They're all going to go independent. Mexico, Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, Chile, etc. They're going to break free because of weakening in the 1700s. Portugal is going to lose its big colony in Brazil. Of course, that's not to say that like the English are able to hold on to all of their colonies. There's 13 of them in North America, English-speaking colonies. Booyah! We declare independence and win it. Thank you, France, for the help. Okay? We'll get to that later. But what is happening in the 1700s that causes Spain and Portugal, two great European imperial powers, to become weaker so that they really can't like continue being like the greatest European powers? Here's one of the answers. Okay? One of the answers is inflation. We actually covered that before. They dug up gold and silver from the Americas, and they brought too much of it back to Europe at any given time. Right? It's kind of like what would happen if, I don't know, how many of you guys like to win like a really big lottery prize? Would you? Would you like that? What would you do if you won like, I don't know, like $20 million? What would you do? Would you spend it? Would there be plenty of people like showing up on your doorstep to say, hey, I'm your friend. Hey, I'm your advisor. Hey, do you want to buy this?
Probably.
And then would you spend it all? Would you want to hang on to some of it? You want to be wise, right? Because, I mean, are there people that actually like blow through their lottery winnings like within a year or two? And then what do they have? Nothing. Yeah. So you have to be careful with the resources you have. Put it this way. Spain and Portugal, they weren't very careful with the gold and silver. It just led to like really high prices in Spain and Portugal. They didn't get the full amount. I think, did I use the diamond ring analogy with you guys last time? Help explain that? Yeah. So if you're going to have something valuable, you got to release it bit by bit by bit. I mean, another one is they just get a lot of competition. Put this down. A lot of competition from the British and the French and the Dutch, among others. Those countries, the latecomers, they're in there and they're like, we're going to take this away from you. We're going to come in and squirrel this away from you and so forth. So very, very tough competition. And another one is actually kind of weird. Good health for their royal rulers. You're like, how could that possibly be bad? If the royal kings and the kings of Spain and Portugal are healthy, and they live a long time, how is that possibly bad? Can anyone tell me? How would that possibly be bad? Why would that be bad? They're the king. They're healthy. They live a long time. They're in charge of the country. How could that possibly be bad? Tell me something about that king that is not good for the country. Nothing? What if they're not a very good king? Oh. What if they're not that clever? What if they're not that adept at actually doing their job? They're not so bad that they're going to get, violent revolution and throw them off the throne, but they're just not that good. They just sort of go, You had that, write it down. In the 1700s, in Spain and Portugal, they had healthy, long-lived kings that really didn't do a very good job of handling the responsibilities that they did. I mean, do we have that issue in our country? No. We have presidents for 4 years at a time. If somebody is not doing a really good job and they're kind of losing it a little bit, you're like, don't elect them again. In fact, lately, we can't elect somebody beyond a 2-year term. So that's going to be an issue for Spain. And let me tell you, their weakness is going to result in them being beaten at various different times. And I want to tell you about a war. Write this down. The War of Jenkins Ear. It is one of the strangest named wars in the history of naming wars. They literally have called it, historically, the War of Jenkins Ear. And it's from 1739 to 1748. So it kind of stretches out. It's between Spain and Britain. And here's how it starts. It actually goes back to a time a little bit before that when the British were ignoring Spanish rules that said that only Spain could trade with Spanish colonies. You got that? Spain's got all these colonies all over the place, and Spain's rules are such that, no, I'm sorry, Britain, you can't trade with our colonies. They're our colonies. Forget about it. But those colonies are like, well, we'd like to buy and sell things to the British. And the British, of course, want to trade with those colonies. Well, here's what the British were doing. They were kind of sneaking in. They kind of snuck in, and they're like, we're going to sneak into this Spanish port. And they started trading. And then the Spanish fleet would show up, and it'd be like, okay, well, looks like we're going to have a little bit of a battle here. Well, in one particular situation, the Spanish, they had actually lost a number of times. And so the Spanish had agreed, okay, fine, here's the deal. Spain had agreed to a situation. And the situation was this. Spain agreed, okay, we'll let you trade at that port facility, that Spanish port, that Spanish colony in the Americas. We'll let you trade with them, but you can only trade with one British ship. Does that make sense? So that seems pretty limited, doesn't it? So here's how the British got around that, because they're sneaky. They followed the letter of the agreement. Only one British ship was trading with that Spanish colony. But they violated the spirit of it. Let's say you're the Spanish colony. I'm the British sea captain. I'm on the British ship. I'm trading with the colonists. And they want to trade as much as possible, but they're part of Spain, so they're told, here's the deal. I'm the British sea captain, and you guys are sea captains of other British ships. You're like, what are you doing here? You can't trade with them. No. Have you figured it out yet? But after I trade with them, then you bring your stuff, put it on my ship, and I trade with them some more. And then you put your stuff on my ship, and I trade with them some more. And you put your stuff on my ship, and I trade with them some more. So are you able to trade with them? Yeah, indirectly. And the Spanish are like, that's terrible. You're violating the rules. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not violating the rules. It's just one ship. And they got into a big fight. The sea captain's name was Jenkins. Okay? The sea captain's name was Jenkins, and he got into a fight with the Spanish authorities, and they cut off his ear. During the fight, they cut off his ear. His ear got sliced off, and there it is lying on the deck of the ship. It's pretty gross, yeah, I'm sorry. So they picked up the ear, They're like, I don't know, we don't know how to reattach it. It's kind of like, so they stuck it in a jar so that it's preserved. Like, whatever. And he kept it. He had this jar. He kept it with him. Weird going over to his house for dinner. You're like, what's that? I'm not going to ask. It's a pickled ear on a jar. Well, that guy, that former sea captain with an ear missing, later became an important member in the British Parliament. And later there was more tension between the Spanish and the British. And this guy got up and he gave a rousing speech for war by Britain against Spain. And you know what he used as part of his speech, that Britain should go to war? And they did. They went to war. They went to war from 1739 to 1748. Guess what was part of his argument? He put the jar with the ear right there on the table for all to see. I mean, he was saying to the members of Parliament, those Spanish did this. Look at it. I will have my vengeance. And the British did go to war with Spain. And I think they beat him in that particular situation. So Spain is losing power and so forth. You got that? 1739 to 1748. So about 9 years. The War of Jenkins Ear. Spain losing out. Sorry, Spain. It's not working out so well for you, is it? Oh my gosh, where the heck did that come from? So, as we continue, we'll just say this, and we'll develop this even more. The next one we're going to be focusing on is the Ottoman Empire, which defeated, this will really stretch out history. The Ottoman Empire defeated the last of the Roman Empire. I mean, Roman Empire, that's like ancient times. Do you know when the Ottoman Empire was finally defeated in history? Just 100 years ago at the end of World War I. The Ottoman Empire is around for a long time. We're going to take a look at how it grows, its challenges, and then how it starts becoming weak. We'll do that next time. Okay? So wipe her down, and then when you're ready, you can head on to your next class. All right, awesome. B. All right. Good. Whew. Oh. Almost forgot. You need to tell me to turn these things off after. Oh, sorry. It's okay. No, it's not. You don't need to apologize, but